but when we close it, we're up probably a good 3/8 of an inch right here. Hey guys, welcome to episode 4 of the Solstice Coupe rebuild. This week we're going to start right in where we left off last week on that quarter panel over there, getting the welds ground down and all that, so that we can get ready to put on our new, slightly used and burnt quarter panel. So we've still got some stuff we've got to do to that, as far as, you know, getting all the burnt paint off and just getting some measurements done down here and prepping it to get put on there, making sure our door lines and all that. So let's get started and see what we can get done. All right, so I'm getting ready to start grinding all these welds down, and really probably the only thing I'm going to grind is the seam right here, so I can check and make sure there's no, a lot of times when you grind the welds down flat, you'll see some little pinholes in there, and I'll weld those back up and grind it down again. Just want to check for that. Usually the only way you can do it is to shine a light from the back side and see if you see any light coming through, and if it is, weld it so you can't see any light. And then I'll grind all these spot welds down flat. And I went ahead and stuck the latch on to see, make sure the door was lining up correctly since I replaced all that. Remember, the quarter panel is just like a skin that goes over the top of this, so all the structure is right here what we've got welded. So that's what holds our latch on, and everything has to be lined up with the door on that. So I put that on and I shut it, and yes, it shuts, but it feels like it's a little bit off, like it hits. I think it's a little bit too far, like the door is too far forward, which makes sense. If our impact was right here, it might have pushed the door forward just a little bit. So I'm sure the adjustment we got in the door hinges can take care of that. If it shuts now and it's that close, we can adjust it. All right, so let's start the fun of grinding again. Alright, so I've got all this stuff ground down, so now let's check and see if we have pinholes. So I'm going to put a light back up behind there. Oh, I see one right there. And I don't see any on this side. So we'll go back and hit that real quick with a little bit of weld. Ooh, where is it? There it is. And should be it. All these down here, I'm just going to leave them. They're not hurting anything like that. I'll just prime over them, and this is all covered by seam sealer over here. So also I wanted to show you guys, I went ahead, I had a stripped out wheel stud. So I don't know if you guys remember from the first episode, but I'd take all this apart and change this knuckle out, and I did not have a new axle nut, so I went ahead and bought a new axle nut. This is the old one. I've got the new one on there, and I've got it torqued to 159 foot-pounds, and I replaced this lug bolt there. So everything in here is done, ready to go mechanically. So new brake line and all that, and so whenever I get it finished, I take it to an alignment shop and get it aligned. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and try to get all this burnt stuff off the quarter panel here. I think I'm gonna leave all this paint on this side and just try to get the burnt stuff off, because factory paint is a really good base, you know, to paint over, to repaint. So I'm going to leave as much of that on as I can, but I'll probably go ahead and get all this in this section down to bare metal, and then we'll prime it. But see how good this paint remover wheel does. We used that on the Porsche, did pretty good on the hood, so let's see if it'll get down in those grooves. right, so I've got most of this burnt paint off. There's a couple little dents right in here from when we were trying to pry from the backside to get it off of the chunk. So I'll have to do some fill work on that once we get it installed. I got a little more to get out here. I couldn't get in that little indentation right there. But I say we go in there and put it on the, like, just kind of set it up on the car and kind of see where we are, see how everything looks like it's lining up and all that. What I want to do is just kind of set it on there enough to see if we got any major issues with fitment. Okay, so remember this little piece we cut off when we took it off the chunk? I still gotta grind that out. I forgot about it. I gotta take that little spot weld off because that thing's holding us up. But it's amazing how close even like the spot welds are to the same spot. Once we get that out of there and get it pushed back some, it might line up exactly. I don't know. But remember, these are two separate, different kinds of cars, and I don't know if they're made the same place or not. Ooh, I gotta grind that off. That was hot too. And so this piece right here, once we get that off, we'll have to push up in there another ½ inch or so, but it all looks like it's gonna line up. So we'll get this back off, grind this burnt spot off here, and then drill out that little piece, and then we'll try it again. This is looking pretty good. We still got probably a good 1/8 inch that this needs to come in here, and I think it's mainly this bottom part of the quarter panel needs to come in. That is like extremely tight right there on the other side, so this needs to be just bent in and pulled in and all that. So I have to clamp that when we weld it. What I need to do now is come down here and figure out exactly where we want to make this cut. So I'll do some measurements and try to get that cut so that we've got a good gap there to weld with, and then we'll put our latch back in and shut the door and kind of check gaps and all that kind of stuff. So we just need to check every gap all the way around to try to figure out if we're where we need to be. All right, so I've got it measured and I taped where my line was all the way around. So I'm gonna go ahead and get a grinding wheel and grind that off, and then we'll put it back on there and see how close we were. All right, so I have that cut and I got it sitting on there, and that let it get a lot closer up here, sorry. So that should be no problem to pull that in. And everything's still good back here. We need to measure how high this thing is supposed to be up. Like, what's the gap between this and this supposed to be on the other side? You know, the top of this little shelf and the edge of this. Is it even, or where's it supposed to be? This is probably a 1/4 inch higher than this little shelf over here, this little edge. And that's not much different. I mean, it might be 3/8 or so right there. So it could go up a little bit. Remember also, we still got to put some of that stuff back behind there that might pull that up a little bit, that panel bond stuff. And also, I remember this door smashed, but when we close it, we're up probably a good 3/8 of an inch right here. But it was also hit like this, so who knows what it really is supposed to be. But down here it doesn't look very bad. So if I lowered that door, I'm gonna hit down here. So, and the gaps are pretty close up here. It's a little tight up there, which if you drop the door on the back, it would raise this, open this gap up a little bit, which it needs. I think the next step before we get start welding anything or gluing anything, or before we can still move everything around, we need to put the other door on so we can see what our options are as far as moving it around, and one that's not, you know, crunched on this side. So, and we have to check and see if our new door that we bought a long time ago is also got power locks. A lot of these did not have power locks, so we'll have to check that too, if it is not, then we have to change the wiring harness in the door. Okay, so before I went and got the other door, I just went ahead to these hinges and loosened these two bolts up on this top hinge just a little bit. And when I did, that door just went click right into the latch. So it shuts just right on. And we're good on our height right here. So that's good. I went ahead and clamped it right here so it wouldn't go sink back down. But our issue is that we are tight at this bottom. See, look at the difference in the height of these. Which there is some flexibility to this thing. So, and I think that this panel bond that's up underneath this seam is a little higher than the panel bond on this seam. So I might need to shave that off a little bit so that goes down, you know, fits naturally up against that, because I mean, we got a 1/4 inch off right here on height. I have to just keep playing around with it until we get it to sit right and then shut and have a right gap across here. See, there's like no gap down here. There's not much on the old piece even. All right, so I went and got the door from my other garage and I just unwrapped it. And then, hey, it's even got a door handle. So we needed to buy one of those. We'll see when we take it off if it's got the broken plastic pieces up underneath it that most of them broke. So it feels solid, so maybe it's still okay. But it has a little bit of damage, a couple little dings right there, and another one right here, scuff. And it's got pinstriping on it, which we'll take off. Ooh, nice door guard. But it's good enough to use right now for all of our gaps. So let's go ahead and flip it and see if we can tell. All right, so I got it flipped over after I about dropped it. So when we take our other door off, we'll switch speakers because who knows if this set outside or what. And also remember, this has the convertible window in it. So we've got to take the window out of this and put the window from our smash door in here. The coupe and the convertible have separate type windows. So let's put that on there and see how it lines up. Alright, so I've got the door on, and we've got too big of a gap right here, a little bit, and it's about right, like right in here, and then it starts getting too tight down here, but this remember, it's not welded in yet, and it's kind of sticking up, so it might be okay once we get it pushed down to where it goes. But my concern is this little spot right here, because it looks like, according to the other side, all this area right here is lined up where it needs to be. And if I try to move the door this way some, then I'm gonna be really bad down there. But I think since this is where it needs to be up here, the door probably needs to come this way and make it right, make the gap right here, and then try to move this thing down there and make the rest of it fit. But the door and this need to be right up here at the top. So I'm gonna play around with that a little while. And this is the part that's frustrating. It just takes forever to get gaps right. So I'll keep playing with it and show you when I get it halfway decent. Okay, here's kind of an interesting little thing I just learned. I was having a hard time getting the top of this door lined up once I got the latch inside here, because there's no adjustment on these things. So I found out, I went and looked at the piece that I cut off of the wrecked one. And on the inside of this, okay, here's where you hook the latch. And this is what's on the back side of that thing. It's a piece that is not I mean, it moves, like you can wiggle it. And so all that's holding that on is this little skinny piece of metal here and here. So it's made to be able to be adjusted with a hammer from the outside. So put those little spacers back on there with some bolts, made a line at the top of it, and then just tapped it down. You can see how much space there is in these squares. You can tap it up and down. It's not, you can't just move it with your hand, you have to hit it with a hammer, and it bends those little wires in the back enough to move it up and down. And then when you screw your bolts in, the friction of the bolt is what holds the latch where it's supposed to be. So I've got it real close. And then I've got all this just kind of sitting there the way it goes, trying to make sure that all this is lined up so that when we put that fiberglass top back on, that we have the right gap in here. If you'll remember, this piece right here on the top fits down in that little thing on the other side right here. So you've got like a little gap here, like you would have on a trunk or something. And so our piece needs to be able to fit in there evenly on both sides, which it looks real close. I'll measure it, but it looks real close. So I think we're almost there. All right, so it's the next day. And what I want to start by doing is taking this back off. Remember, it's just sitting on there. There's nothing holding it on except for the latch kind of is in the way. So take the latch back off, take the quarter panel back off, and then we'll finish everything we need to do on the inner structure in there. So I've got some paint that is called Easy Coat. It's made to mimic the color of the E-coating underneath there, which is this color right here. You can see it on the bumper. So that is like super close. So this is called Olive Green, made by SEM. So I'm gonna take all that back off and we'll prep that inner structure piece for paint. We have to, everything's ground down, I think, in there, but we also have to do the coating on the seam sealer. All right, so I've got this thing wiped down with wax and grease remover, and I went ahead and just taped up that old panel bond on there, just because I don't want to get any paint on there that might keep our new panel bond from adhering to it really well. So first thing I'm going to do is anything I've got bare metal showing, like right there, that weld area and all those grind down spots and any welds, I'm going to hit them with self-etching primer, and I'll let that dry, and then we'll go back and paint the whole thing with that new Easy Coat coating to make it look like the rest of it. All right, so our support piece is painted and dry, and that's a really good match. I just found that they made that this week. So now I'm gonna go ahead and get my seam sealer and do the seam all the way down, get that filled back in. All right, so the last thing I'm gonna do for today, I've got that seam sealer finished. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to panel bond all the old panel bond back on, because I need it for the distance and the space between the quarter panel and that inner structure. So I'm going to use this 3M panel bond, and you have to buy this special gun, which is expensive for it. It has two different size tubes. There's a big and a small side to this, and it goes in this gun only one way. And then it has this special nozzle. Okay, so it's a two-part stuff, and when you put this nozzle in there, it takes both of those together and it weaves them together, the two different epoxy parts, and when it comes out of this tube, out of the nozzle, it is mixed. That is really cool. So show you how this works with this nozzle. This is cool. I'm squeezing should be pushing it out, and it mixes it. There's a brown and a black. It's mixing it together as it comes out. You can see at the top how they're different colors. It's black, and that's the mixed adhesive. Really cool. Fix this little area here. Put that on. I've got a piece right here that goes on. Still got the little piece left on it, so I know it goes exactly like that. Now I'm gonna go ahead and glue this piece back on, and then I've got various clamps to get all those on. It's got to be clamped for at least 6 hours, and then allowed to cure for 24 hours before we start messing with it with the quarter panel. Alright, so I've got all the clamps off and everything is glued on, panel bonded on. It's a couple days later since I last videoed, but I also went ahead and the day after all of this stuff dried, I went ahead and panel bonded this piece on, so it is now on there solid and will not go anywhere. Alright, so I've got the top laying back on here again. Here is the gap on this side, and this is what it's supposed to look like. So here, let's go over to this other side. And it's very, very close. So, and there's some adjustment inside there on those bolts. You can slide it around a little bit. If that's lined up right here and the target top is lines up right, then we're good. You know, the only other thing that's to really line up is these tail lights. And I mean, all these things are lined right up. So also, to be absolutely sure that all these gaps will be okay on this, I went ahead and put the target top on, and it lined, up perfectly. There's no issue with that at all. So as long as we can get all this lined up and all I got to do is deal with that door problem, I'm okay, I think. The only thing we're not 100% sure on is the bumper lining up, but as long as this piece right here is lined up to the old paint marks, and we didn't move any of our brackets back here, and all those lined up on the holes of this, it all should be fine back here. So check this out, guys. I noticed that I had a little bit of a gap right here a while ago, and so I loosened this back up, took the clamp off, and lifted it back up so that I took this space out right here. And when I did, I realized, well, my door would be way too low. So if I went back and loosened up the top hinge, pulled this up, which tightens this gap up too much, but I can fix that later. And that really brings this door, I've got the latch off right now, but this gap gets a lot better. See my line earlier? So it moved it probably 3/16 of an inch forward, enough to where it's almost, it's still tight, but it's almost acceptable. So I think this might work. It's a huge relief if it does. So I'll just keep on playing with it. But if I had not have put this top on and saw that my quarter panel was tilted forward a little bit, which allowed me to move the door up, then I would have never seen that. I would have never known that. So that shows us that we need to put the whole thing together before we do anything drastic, to check gaps everywhere, because you might see something that you didn't know before. Right now I'm gonna go ahead and take off this top again, this centerpiece here, go ahead and remove the quarter panel again, and then kind of lift up the back top just enough where I can work on all these spot welds and grind all the spot welds out. Just get everything prepped to get this thing, put it in permanently. And then we'll put it back on, raise or lower the top back down, get it exactly where we want it, clamp it, and see what all we got to do before we actually glue it. So I think we're getting close to actually installing it for good. Alright, so what I did there in that flurry of activity was to grind down all the spot welds, and then I used weld through primer on them, And I'm not sure if I'm going to weld through this with spot welds up underneath or if I'm going to panel bond that, but either way, it's ready. And all that up there and this down here. So all that's ready for welding. And then I readjusted. I've got our top blocked up on a block there, so I moved the quarter panel in and out. And then I readjusted our latch up back to match the door again. And I mean, it is like, if you can see that or not, it's right on. I mean, it's just like super. That's the best it's fit so far as lining the latch up. So once all that dries up there, I'll let it sit overnight. And if you ever tried to weld with weld through primer and when it's not 100% dry, it's like it just won't you can't hardly get a spark going. So we'll let that dry overnight. And then tomorrow we'll put that thing back on there and see how good we can get it to line up and clamp it and make sure the door still shuts good and everything, and then panel bond it. Thanks guys for watching this episode of Rebuild It. We really appreciate you hanging around with us this week. And I did not get anywhere near the amount of stuff I wanted to get done this week on the car, but this was probably the most tedious and important episode that we'll have as far as this build, because everything hinges on how well that quarter panel works and goes together. So get all of our gaps right on the whole car. So I think we've got it lined up where it needs to be. So hopefully on the next episode, we'll be finished on that side. We can jump over here to this easy thing, just replacing this door. And then we'll start doing body work on the whole car, just little dents and stuff, fixing that, getting ready to send it to Mike. So thanks again. We'll see you next week. If you enjoyed the episode, please give us a thumbs up and share us with your friends, and make sure you're a subscriber. We'll see you next week.
And always remember, don't retire it if you can rebuild it. Thanks so much guys for tuning in and watching this week's episode of Rebuild It. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any awesome content. Have a good one.